you're making the point, no need to worry because it's just a handful of products. Really?
Yes, what we do at the endowment is go where the data leads us. So I dug into U.S. trade data, import data from last year. And what's amazing is just how concentrated Chinese exports to the U.S. are in a relatively small number of sectors. You correctly characterized the products where where there's still a lot of trade between China and the United States. Outside of those sectors, the chances of trade deflection are minimal. On top of this, it should be noted that even in the 101 products that you talked about, half of those products are losing ground inside the U.S. market. So these are not China's most fearsome exporters.
But these are very strategic items. We're talking about lithium batteries, auto parts, and consumer products.
Sure.
I mean, these will matter more than thousands of others.
We're also, so in this group of products, yes, some are sensitive, like lithium batteries, smartphones, computer parts. The cars are internal combustion engine cars, which are being shipped to the U.S., not EVs. Also on this list are plastics, as well as toys and video games, which are not so strategically important. So when you unpack this 101 different products, many of them are in non-strategic sectors like footwear and paper napkins. And I think what's important for your listeners to do is, or watchers to do, is to go into this granularly and see which of these products actually their firms compete against, or which the firms that they're analyzing and tracking and pricing compete against.
So do you see decoupling happening down the road, especially when it comes to these very meaningful strategic items like lithium batteries? And we were just talking about a South Korean battery company pulling out of Indonesia's vertical integration vision, and a Chinese company filling in the gap as an investor there. I mean, do you think that we will see more of this and companies having to choose the U.S. or China when it comes to their supply chains?
The short answer is yes, so long as these tariffs remain at very elevated levels. Even if they come down from the 145% or so down to 50, 60%, as some are mooting in Washington, this will cause significant decoupling, and there will be pressure on companies to essentially choose where they source from. Or some may even actually end up having dual sourcing strategies. For one region of the world, use China. For another region of the world, the North America, you use North American sourcing. So notwithstanding what I said about trade deflection, which I think has been overstated, the threat of decoupling has not. And I think it is a serious concern for companies operating across the Pacific.
Simon Martin here. Pleasure to have you on the show. So this whole issue of deflection, and I think we need to really simplify it for viewers, right? What we're talking about is because of what's going on with this trade war, out of China, the stuff made in China, what would have otherwise gone to the U.S. because the tariffs is either going to be priced out of the market, or is just going to be shut out of the market, right? Those goods, and this is Chinese overcapacity you were talking about here, has to go somewhere. And I think the risk of the fear has been it's going to come down to Southeast Asia, and we're going to get flooded by Chinese products. You're saying that of the products that go to the U.S., 19,000, only just over 101 are at risk of this redirection and headed to markets like, let's say, Southeast Asia. So lithium batteries, smartphones, auto parts, also consumer products, aren't these all things which at the end of the day, consumers in these economies or countries are going to be more than happy to see falling prices for? I mean, if it's cheaper Chinese lithium batteries or smartphones, I mean, wouldn't they welcome that?
Short answer is yes. And by the way, thanks for unpacking trade deflection for your viewers. But short answer is yes. These are products which will go down in price if they are redirected. And it's very interesting to note that in Southeast Asia, the previous reaction of governments to floods of imports from China has not been to raise trade barriers like the anti-dumping measures which were mentioned earlier in your show. It's actually been to surgically bail out local firms which get into a bit of trouble because they're competing against Chinese product. So the reaction in Southeast Asia has been much more measured, below the radar screen, less provocative towards China. It's entirely in line with the ASEAN way of handling things.
Would you agree, though, that, I mean, maybe not smartphones, maybe not auto parts, maybe not consumer products, but certainly lithium batteries? I mean, this is key to one of the technologies of the future, right? EVs and pretty much everything else could be flying cars next. I don't know, right? But if there is a country, let's say, that's into making lithium batteries, or at least part of the supply chain, I'm thinking of, let's say, Indonesia here, right? It's probably a good example, right? Wouldn't they feel at risk and at threat? You know, because it may not be as simple as going, okay, so look, if we're gonna be at risk of being flooded by cheaper Chinese imports of lithium batteries, all you have to do is just find some other sort of cheaper base to manufacture from. But that's not going to work for Indonesia, because, I mean, it wants to be a player, wants to be that base for lithium.
So what I would say there is that, you know, as I indicated, some ASEAN countries have taken surgical import measures, and this might well be a case that Indonesia takes the position that in order to defend its plans for ramping up battery production, that it too raises trade barriers. But the point I want your viewers to take away is that if you look at this matter case by case, product by product, you will end up with far fewer problems than the broad brush characterizations which are being considered. So yes, Indonesia may take restrictive measures on imports if it thinks that's a good thing. But if it's reacting to the actual circumstances on the ground, that will be much more surgical than many people think, and we will not get a wave of protectionism against Chinese products as a result, especially not from your region.